go ahead or should we start?
I think you can start.
Okay, great. All right, this is Kathy Dodd speaking. Trustee Dodd, I'm the chair of the administration committee, so I will be running this meeting today. Thank you for everybody who is joining us. Bear with us a little bit, or I guess I should say bear with me a little bit, as this is the first time I've run a remote meeting like this in terms of making sure we follow our procedures and things like that. So as people come into the meeting, our village manager will be admitting people into the meeting. So as the meeting goes on, and I will also be watching it to make sure we don't have people in the lobby as we're going through this. All right, so this is a meeting of the Administration Committee of the Village Board. So I'd first like to start by asking Mr. Brayman to take a roll call.
All right, Trustee Dodd?
Here.
Trustee Farrell?
Here.
Trustee Sullivan?
Here.
All right, we have a quorum present.
Okay, because this is a remote meeting, I'm just going to read a few procedures just so for those of you who are on the call know this is what we also read typically during our village board meeting, just to help everybody know how to participate and stay engaged in the discussion. This meeting is being conducted remotely. Can you guys hear that echo?
Yeah, something.
There we go.
Okay.
In full disclosure, that was me. Sorry.
I was like, I hope it's not me because I'm not sure. Okay, let me start over.
Trustee Dodd was getting on a roll, and I just couldn't let that happen. Had to throw off her game. Sorry, Kathy.
Okay, this meeting is being conducted remotely via Microsoft Teams software. The state of Illinois is under portions of a stay-at-home order, which was issued by Governor Pritzker as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result, all in-person meetings of the village have been canceled. The state has amended the Open Meetings Act to permit electronic meetings, and we are conducting our business in compliance with state law and the Open Meetings Act. This meeting is being broadcast live on local channel 6 and at the village's YouTube page. A recording of the meeting will be archived on the village's website. A remote meeting requires a different mechanic for public participation. So to ensure that our residents and other interested parties have the opportunity to participate in this meeting, we have solicited public comment via email. So if you send an email to publiccomment@wilmette.com prior to the start of the meeting, our staff will read the email during the appropriate portion of the meeting. Members of the public watching YouTube Live wishing to comment during the designated public comment period, you may submit comments through the chat feature on YouTube Live, and a member of the village staff will read your comment. For those who have connected via Microsoft Teams or telephone and wish to address the committee in person, I will ask people to speak up when it is time for public comment. Due to logistics, I will first ask someone to identify themselves if they would like to address the committee. We will then assemble the list and call on the individual people, person by person. So I'll start the process by asking who would like to speak. For those who choose to speak, I would like to remind you that you have 3 minutes. Comments from the public, no matter how they were received, will be recorded into the meeting minutes as we typically do. I'd also just like to add for those of you, we have received a number of comments. The board has received, or the committee here has received a number of comments regarding this issue, many of which were included in the packet. For those of you who submitted comments after the packet was established, many of those were included as additional comments. So you can see those as well on our website. And for anybody who submitted comments, within the last several hours, hour or two, we will make sure that those comments are added into the material that gets sent out after this meeting or prior to the first one. The agenda materials for this meeting were posted on Wilmette.com on Thursday of last week. With our meeting introductions complete, we will start first by turning to the agenda, and I'd like to just ask for a motion to approve the minutes from the last Administration Committee meeting, which was on February 13th, 2018.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Brayman, I believe we need to take a roll call on this.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So can we take roll call to approve the minutes of the administration meeting on February 13th, 2018?
Yes, Trustee Farrell?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye.
All right, the motion carries.
Okay, great. So the next item on our agenda is discussion of boards and commissions. We have a presentation that's been prepared by our village manager, Michael Brayman, and the staff. However, before turning over the presentation to our village manager, I'd like to just say a few words to everybody on the phone as well as to my fellow trustees. I first would like just to welcome everybody to the Administration Committee meeting today. I'm very excited to be starting this process of reevaluating our boards and commissions, in particular our Housing Commission and Human Relations Commission. I'd like to thank everybody who is attending this meeting. So we have 17 people on the call, it looks like, so that's a great turnout. And also to everybody who has emailed us in preparation for this meeting or has reached out to one of us on this commission to share your perspective. I'd also like to thank the work of the staff as well as Trustee Kennedy and Barrow in terms of helping prepare for this meeting. I firmly believe hearing from residents on topics being considered by the board is one of the most important roles that we as trustees have. So really appreciate all of you attending and sending us emails. I recognize the events that have occurred in our society recently has created a lot of attention and focus on what we as a community can do to address these racial and social inequities. I also know many of you wish we had addressed this topic sooner than we did. And for that, I want to apologize. But what I hope is that we can all use that energy and enthusiasm we have on this topic to work together to reinvigorate our Housing and Human Relations Commission and to review the selection appointments of our boards and commissions. I'd like to just set some broad expectations for the process we'll follow during these next several meetings that our committee will meet. My goal for today is to understand the issues, provide a framework for how we're going to evaluate and study the issues, and then define a process for how we'll address and hopefully solve the issues. While many of us here today may feel we already understand the issues or know the end result we'd like to achieve, I think following a clearly defined process helps us come to a better result when everyone feels their voices are heard. So as a result of that, I expect that we will need several meetings before we will be ready to present our findings to the full board. And I'd also just like to make sure everybody knows that our findings then are presented to the full board, and it is the full board that will ultimately decide how we proceed. With that, I will turn it over to our village manager, Mike Brayman. Thank you for listening to those few opening comments. I just felt it was important to just set some objectives of how we're going to run the next few meetings. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Dodd. I'm going to share my screen here for the presentation. John Adler, if we have anybody else trying to join the meeting, if you could make sure to let them in for the lobby, I would appreciate that. All right. Can everybody see the presentation here?
I can.
Okay. Now we're on the main slide, right? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much, Trustee Dodd. I am going to start here on the second slide here in terms of the scope of our review. And really the scope is determined based on feedback we've received from members of the village board, from the community at large, and from village staff as we've been working through this process. So there's three main topics we're going to be looking to address as we move forward, and obviously subtopics associated with that. So the first is the efficiency and effectiveness of our boards and commissions. Some of these items like training and orientation can be implemented by village staff without any action by the board, but we certainly would like some feedback and direction on those types of items. And then other items like—
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we are only still seeing the first slide. We're not seeing the slide you're following.
All right, let me try this. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize for that.
No, thank you. I had two presentations up and was moving through the wrong one. They're the same, but the wrong one. So anyway, efficiency and effectiveness of boards and commissions. So as Trustee Dodd had talked about, the focus of this review is largely going to be on our Housing and Human Relations Commissions and identifying those responsibilities moving forward. We also want to look at the composition of our boards and commissions, number of members on each of our bodies, the diversity of membership, term limits, attendance expectations, and the like, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we move through the presentation. Recruitment of members is obviously a very important topic, and we want to make sure we address this in twofold. One is increasing the number of volunteers that we have on hand to appoint to the board, but we've also heard from the community that they would like some more discussion around our appointment and our selection process. So we will be having that as we move forward. And also recognition of members. Our volunteers, our residents put in a lot of time serving the community, and we want to make sure we're properly recognizing their efforts. And we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. I'm going to move on here. So in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, the training component, we'd like to implement a new member orientation. And actually, probably about 8 or 10 years ago, we had started working on this as staff, and it had just fallen off with other projects. But as village trustees know, you receive a fairly intensive new trustee orientation, and we haven't done a good enough job of orienting our new board and commission members. So we'd like to put a plan in place that has some suggested trainings, such as Open Meetings Act, Freedom of Information Act, and other similar legal trainings, as well as overviews of our guiding policy documents, especially for our land use committees, the comprehensive plan, the affordable housing plan, the village center master plan, making sure that all those land use committees that touch on those topics really have a good understanding of the genesis of those plans and how they're going to impact our community moving forward. So this is something we're going to start to work on and implement. Obviously, in the COVID era, it's going to be a little bit different than it would have been if we could do these in-person trainings and meetings one-on-one, but it is something we're going to start implementing as we can, and certainly any feedback we receive from the committee will incorporate into that. So I had briefly touched on consolidation opportunities, and back in 2010, we had consolidated a number of boards and commissions into the Human Relations Commission. And at the same time, we consolidated the Bike Task Force. The Bicycle Task Force was actually an ad hoc committee that essentially became a standing committee of the village. But as we were reducing staffing levels during the depths of the Great Recession, we had to look at the time that was required of all of our boards and commissions and where our staff time was being allocated. And that was really one of the major impetuses of moving forward with these consolidations you see on the screen. And I think what we've realized here is that first bullet point, the human relations consolidations, doesn't seem to have worked out the way we had intended. So we had brought together Community Relations, Youth Commission, Fine Arts, Board of Health, Commission on Persons with Disabilities, and many years ago I was the staff liaison to some of those commissions and then to the new Human Relations Commission. And it just never really took off. So this might not have been the right mix, or maybe we didn't have the roles, responsibilities, and mission right. And I think that, obviously we're seeing that now in how the Human Relations Commission kind of petered out, and we'll talk a little bit more what they were working on, but this is certainly a good opportunity to review what we did here, see if it still makes sense, and see if maybe doing something a little bit different will be helpful. When we consolidated these two commissions and trying to keep as many volunteers active as possible, we had made both bodies 9 members. So the Environmental and Energy Commission was 7 members. When the Bike Task Force was consolidated, we increased that to 9. Same with Human Relations Commission. To keep as many of those members on the other boards as active as possible, we took all those bodies, which were 7 members, and made the new Human Relations Commission 9. We don't really recommend any consolidations right now. In reviewing this at the staff level, most of the consolidation opportunities were at the land use body level, and talking with John Adler, our Director of Community Development, looking what other municipalities around us do. It just didn't really seem to make sense for us right now. Some of the potential consolidations are listed in the memo in the packet, but since we're not recommending them, I don't think there's a large movement afoot to start looking at those types of consolidation opportunities. We're just going to kind of skip over that part in this presentation and move on to I'm lost. And kind of move on to really where the focus of this review is, and that's on the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission. So one of the goals of the Administration Committee's process here is to determine the appropriate rules and responsibilities moving forward. So the Housing Commission was primarily focused on administering what is now a privately funded housing assistance program and the emergency housing assistance program. So we went and looked back at minutes of the last several years of when the Housing Commission was active, and these were really the only functions that they were performing. So when the village board had decided to create the not-for-profit Housing Our Own Wilmette and start raising private funds and administering that privately, there really was no active role for the Housing Commission to play in regards to that program. Emergency assistance, the village still funds that program every year, and it's administered by staff in the Community Development Department. We receive a very small handful of applications each year. We review them based on the program guidelines, and we approve them as staff. So we're continuing to perform that function and continuing to provide those grant funds as needed when applications are received. Human Relations Commission, the primary focus of that commission, and in a review of the minutes that we had undertook, was the Black History Month. Essentially was a poster contest for elementary school children. Some of the schools would participate, submit artwork, and then the commission would judge that and present awards, and those awards would then be presented at a village board meeting. And the last 2 or 3 years of the commission's work, they also had created the Wilmette Person of the Year Award, and they had given out a couple of those awards. Other than that, the commission had really struggled to kind of find its way forward after the consolidation from those other bodies, as I had talked about previously. So in our review and preparing the agenda materials for the committee, when we were thinking about consolidation, we went and we looked at how our other North Shore neighbors are handling these types of boards and commissions. So this is just a reference here. I'm going to skip to the right side a little bit here. The separate plan and ZBA, this was something we had discussed internally, whether it makes sense to consolidate those two. As you can see, Lake Bluff is the outlier in Consolidated Plan and Zoning Board of Appeals. We don't think it's necessary or appropriate here to consolidate ours. So really, you know, what may be helpful here on this slide is looking at the Human Relations Commission and the housing commissions in other communities, and seeing what those bodies are doing, what functions they're performing, and how those may be able to translate to what we want to do here in Wilmette. And we'd also talked about...
Mike?
Yes.
Can you go back to that for just a minute? I do think it would be helpful for us to look at these other communities and look at kind of, you know, specifically not, in addition to just the role of what these two, the Housing Commission, Human Relations Commissions, you know, what they're intended to do, but it'd just be also helpful, I think, to see a sense of what are some of the projects they've done over the last year or two, just to get a better sense of, how, you know, what are they doing, and how is it helpful to the community, and how is it helpful to the board.
Yep, we'll review their agenda packets and their minutes, and we'll reach out to their staff liaisons as well to have a good feel for what they're doing in those communities, and bring a report back for one of the future committee meetings.
Okay, and then the other question I might ask is, for those communities who don't have a housing commission, so Deerfield, or, you know, for that matter, just pick them because they're top of the list. I'd be interested in, if they don't have a housing commission, do they have an affordable housing plan, and how does that, you know, where is, you know, some of the work that might need to be done around the affordable housing? Where is that happening if it's not happening on the housing commission?
Okay.
It just might give us another perspective. Okay. And I just want to, the other trustees, feel free to, you know, chime in as we're going through this as well.
Okay. All right, so in terms of composition, you know, there's two primary goals and then several other issues that the committee will address as we move forward here. The first is the appropriate number of members for each body. We had talked about this very briefly at a previous administration committee meeting a couple of years ago, but a couple of our bodies, Environmental and Energy, Historic Preservation, and Human Relations, have 9 members. There's some research out there that says any committee of more than 7 individuals is generally less productive. So we may find that this is worth looking at and reviewing in a little bit more detail. And maybe what we'll do is, you know, when we're reaching out to those other communities, is also look at how many members are on their boards and commissions, just for comparable purposes. Not that we need to mirror what they're doing, but that information is always enlightening and helpful. And then also looking at the appropriate term limits for each body. Actually, all but our Building Code Board of Appeals, our Electrical Commission, and our Police and Fire Pension Boards have term limits. And that's on a future slide, but the term limits are a little bit different for each board or commission. So we may want to look at standardizing those, or we may feel they're appropriate as is, but generally we have term limits across the board.
Mike, do you know why we don't have term limits on those?
You know, the Police and Fire Pension Boards, actually the majority of members there are selected from the membership of the pension funds. So there's 5 members on the Police Pension Board. 3 are police officer representatives elected amongst their own membership that we have no control over. The other 2 are appointed by the village president. So that is a state statute type board, and those are set that way, which is why we don't have term limits there. The Building Code Board of Appeals and Electrical Commission, I'm not entirely sure. We'll look into that. My guess is there's very specific requirements in terms of backgrounds or experience, training you need to have to serve on those boards. And I think generally those are hard to find. And that's actually why some of the Electrical Commission positions have been vacant, is you need actually certified electricians and whatnot. And that was in our packet, but those are not necessarily easy to find. So if you find the right people, it makes sense to keep them on the board. And they generally only meet as needed for appeals. So it's very rare that those bodies even meet. So it's possible somebody would be appointed for an entire term. There's not an actual meeting because there's been no appeal by a homeowner or a contractor working on a project. And then other issues for the committee to review is diversity of membership, looking at work and education experience, age, ethnicity, race, gender, and the like. As was in the board meeting materials, some of our boards and commissions do have recommended backgrounds in terms of relevant experience or education or training. Appearance review is one that comes to mind, but there's a number of those, and that's listed in the packet. Question of meeting frequency had come up. There are no requirements in the village code for any of our boards or commissions to meet a minimum number of times each year. Generally, they meet as needed. And attendance, several years ago, we were having some attendance issues at our boards and commissions, which is creating some quorum issues. The village code does allow the village president to remove a member who misses a number of consecutive meetings, either 3 meetings for some boards or 4 meetings for other boards. In my 10 years of working in Wilmette, I have never seen a village president remove somebody from missing meetings. Generally, we can just address those directly with the individual. But as we'll see on a future slide, we generally have not had quorum issues over the last 2 or 3 years.
Mike?
Yes.
Just in terms of meeting frequency, where you indicated there's no requirements in the village code for any board or commission to meet a minimum number of times per year, are there any state, Illinois state statutes around that at all that we should be aware of?
I do not believe so, but I will check with Corporation Counsel Stein.
Okay, that would be helpful. And then, is there anything in our village code? I thought I saw this in the material when there was some, when we did our last kind of review of these boards and commissions. Is there anything in our village code around a maximum number of meetings per?
So many years ago, and I think this goes back to 2008 or 2009, as we were trying to address the amount of staff time associated with the boards and commissions, was that a number of the bodies had budgeted number of meetings and a budgeted number of staff hours allocated. What we found is that in practice just really didn't work as intended. So in future revisions to the village code, we had generally removed those, but I think we had actually left one of those stragglers behind in the code, and I can't remember which board or commission it's for, but it's something we'll clean up as we go through this process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
In terms of composition, this just kind of shows how many members are on each of our boards and commissions. So we have a total of 77 volunteer positions. As I mentioned, on the police and fire pension boards, each of those boards has 5 members. Only 2 are appointed by the village. The other 3 on each body are appointed by the members themselves. Board of Fire and Police Commissioners with 3 members, that is per state statute. And the Board of Fire and Police Commissioners, their role is to handle all the hiring of new police officers, new firefighters, and promotions of police sergeants and fire lieutenants. So it's a very different type of board or commission than our other bodies. And as mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have Environment and Energy, Historic Preservation, and Human Relations with 9 members. Composition and term limits. So as the question had come up about the number of term limits, the boards and commissions listed on this slide that have term limits are here. As you'll see on the bottom, not listed, Police and Fire Pension Boards, Building Code Board of Appeals, and Electrical Commission do not have term limits. And we had just talked about quorums. As you can see, we generally have not had any quorum issues on the far right. Some of the boards meet a lot more often than the others, such as zoning. Appearance Review or Fire and Police Commission, and others meet as needed throughout the year. And you can also see the maximum number of terms, the years per term. So you can see they're kind of different, and I think this has evolved over time. So this may be something the committee wants to drill a little bit deeper into and see if it makes sense to standardize, or if the way we're doing it now makes a lot of sense. And you'll see in the middle, in terms of the number of members by code and number of current members, there's just a couple of vacancies if you don't account for the Housing and Human Relations, and there'll be a future slide that addresses vacancies in a little bit more detail. So there's a lot of data on this slide for presentation purposes, and I think it'll help us as we move forward, really focusing on the composition of our boards and commissions. So recruitment and selection, two goals for the committee. One is to increase the number of residents volunteering to serve, in a future slide.
Peter here, I'm sorry, I was muted. My apologies here. Can you go back one? Back to the that one, thank you. Can you speak to when the quorum issues arose in the zoning, for the zoning board? Is that recent? Is that back to 2017? How current are those three?
Sure. John Adler's online. I don't know, John, if you wanted to step in and help me out here. I'm not sure, Trustee Barrow. I know we had more significant issues prior to 2017, and those have been resolved. These three, I'd have to go back and look a little bit more in detail.
I don't think they are that recent, but we'll verify that.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like to know if that's a 2019 problem.
Very good. We'll do.
I'm sorry, can I just speak to that just for a moment? And I don't know, Peter, since we're talking about it. I mean, I think there is, especially as you look at something like zoning, there is a difference between having a quorum and having full membership there, especially as because generally if you're coming in front of the zoning board or the plan commission, it's lightly because you're requesting variances. And so, and I don't know if this is, and so I wonder if it would be helpful for us to have a sense of how often, all the commissioners are present or not. I'm not sure that it's relevant. For this discussion, but I just was piggybacking on your question about zoning board, because I do think when not all members of the zoning board are present and a resident is requesting a relief, it often is a problem for them if there's only 5 members there, yet that's still a quorum, or 4 members, and yet that's still a quorum.
That's a very good point, Kathy.
And I don't know if that's something we should be discussing here, or that's a land use. We've talked about looking at that, Mike, about whether we should modify. I don't think that's the scope of this project, though, right?
Well, I think it's appropriate to look at, to answer the question that both you and Trustee Barrow have asked, and if we do identify an issue, we could then determine how to address that, whether that's through this committee or the land use committee or some other form.
Okay.
So we'll do the research and come back to the committee with some information.
Great.
Even if it doesn't have a quorum, at the end of the day, the zoning board and planning commission responsibility is to break apart, ask the appropriate questions, do a lot of the legwork for us as board members where we have to approve it. Where it becomes a problem is if the board only has 5 people or 4 people at meetings.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't think that has happened. So
that's where the research would be helpful.
Yep, we'll confirm that. Recruitment and selection. 2 primary goals for the committee here. One is to increase the number of residents volunteering to serve, and we'll have a future slide that shows the number of talent banks we've received over the last 5 years. And we also want to review the appointment and selection process for new members. And the Corporation Council will prepare a memorandum for an upcoming committee meeting to address the appointment process, where those powers lie, and what options may be available if there was any desire to change. So that is something that's in process and will be before the committee at one of its future meetings. Yes.
Wait, can you go back to the slide for just a moment, like the previous slide? So I know you indicated that corporate counsel is going to prepare a memorandum on the appointment process. It's my understanding that actually President Belinsky will also be preparing a memo to help us understand his process he uses. So there's some that to appoint members as well. Is that true?
Yes, I'm not sure the timing on that, but that'll answer some of the questions in terms of his process and what he goes through in his appointment. So that'll be forthcoming, and I think that'll help inform the committee's discussions as we move forward.
Okay.
So in terms of recruitment and increasing the number of volunteers submitting talent banks, there's a couple of recommendations that we're making. One is to create an online form for TBQs. We've had a very old PDF process, and we file those PDFs away, and then when there's a vacancy, President Belinsky will ask the staff to provide him all the TBQs for that specific board or commission. We scan them all in and we send it to them. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to make the process easier for residents to submit, and then easier for the village to review and turn them around faster. So that is something we can do fairly quickly. Also, a lot of our talent banks tend to get stale over time. We leave them in the file, and when there's a vacancy, we pull all of those out for that specific board or commission. But it may be helpful to try to refresh our talent banks each year by proactively reaching out to somebody who's submitted, confirming that they still remain interested, see if they're interested in additional boards or commissions, and give them an opportunity to update their resumes and other areas of interest. So if a vacancy does come up 1, 2, 3 years down the road, we do have the most current information. That'll be a little bit more time intensive for staff, but I think it's worth the time, and it'll provide value as we move forward. And we also may want to look at a more macro level communication strategy to increase the number of residents submitting talent banks. So in the packet for the committee was a proposal from Metro Strategies, they're our communications consultant, on a program they can help us put together to really do a greater push on our boards and commissions so that we can increase the number of volunteers. From time to time, we may have a story in e-news, asking people to submit talent banks, and maybe from time to time in our communicator, which is our village newsletter that goes out 3 times a year, but that's generally about it. We have not had a concerted effort to increase the number of volunteers serving, and I think it's something we can do at a fairly nominal cost, and will pay dividends as we move forward.
Mike, a question for you, please. If someone submits a questionnaire, whether they're showing an interest in a committee that has a vacancy or not, what's the response, if any, that the person receives, and from whom is that response?
Sure. So I guess first, when we get a talent bank questionnaire, that is shared with all members of the village board so that we know it's been received. And then we also send a letter on behalf of the village president, and that's sent by staff to the individual submitting it, stating we've received your talent bank, we'll review it and follow up with you as appropriate. And then as vacancies arise, President Belinsky would then potentially reach out to folks and interview them for that vacancy. But we do have it's a form letter that we send out upon receipt of every talent bank.
Mm-hmm.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. There's a perception that there's a lack of communication back from the village to residents that have submitted. And I just wanted to be sure that there was actually a process in place whereby people got letters or emails acknowledging at least the receipt of their questionnaire.
Yes, we do that, and I did just review it the other week as we were preparing these materials. So that is still happening, and we'll continue to do that moving forward. But that's also something we could look at tweaking and doing a little bit differently if the committee thinks makes sense as well.
Well, and one thing I was going to add to that, Mike, is, in addition to putting together a strategy to increase the number of talent bank questionnaires that are coming to us, I think that has some questions I've gotten from residents around just what's our process for how we communicate how we communicate vacancies of positions, because by communicating vacancies of positions, that also could naturally increase our talent bank questionnaires. And so it'd be helpful for us to look at how we're communicating those vacancies, and is that effective, and is there anything we could be doing there as another mechanism to encourage more members to volunteer.
Sure, and to be honest, I don't think we've done a very good job of communicating vacancies at the staff level. So I think that's something we can focus on as part of our communication strategy here, that as vacancies are arising, we've got a process and a plan to make sure the word gets out to the community.
Yes.
And provide residents an opportunity to submit at that time.
Yeah, because there's definitely a perception from the community that we're not communicating well enough the vacancy. So I'm glad to hear at least that we think that that's something we can improve upon.
Absolutely. So there is a lot of data on this slide, and I'm not going to review it all. I think it's helpful in terms of a reference and as we dig deeper into the appointment and selection process here. But we did go back over the last 5 years and look at the number of talent bank questionnaires we've received each year, number of appointments and the number of reappointments that have been made, the number of open talent bank questionnaires, and by open we mean those that have been received, and then an individual who has not been appointed to a board or commission, and then the number of vacancies. And you'll see we do have those 3 vacancies. Environment and energy is 2, historic preservation has 1. We know housing and human relations have vacancies for all positions. And then not listed on here is the electrical commission and building code board of appeals, as it's kind of a separate issue in terms of their requirements to be appointed, and really not the focus of our review here.
Mike, can you speak to a little bit just the how we handle reappointments?
Sure. Reappointments, anytime somebody's term expires, or is expiring, and they're eligible for reappointment, President Belinsky will ask the staff liaison to reach out to the individual and see if they'd be interested in continuing to serve. If that individual is interested, we then put a recommendation for reappointment on a village board agenda, and then at the next meeting, we put the reappointment of that individual. So it's a 2-step process, kind of like an introduction and then an adoption of an ordinance. Generally, if somebody is interested in continuing to serve, they are reappointed. If they're not, then the village president would go, through the other appointment process and interview persons to appoint. In my time here in Wilmette, I can't recall off the top of my head when somebody was not reappointed after having stated they're interested in being reappointed. So generally, we do look for that continuity on those boards and commissions.
So Mike, just to explain that a little bit further, so using the zoning board as an example, we appoint somebody, they serve their 5 years, we'd like them to serve a second term of 5 years, that's the reappointment.
Correct.
At the expiration of their second term, if they fulfill the first of all those 10 years, President Belinsky does not have the power to reappoint them or make an exception because we need them to stay on because we have a vacancy or nobody's volunteered.
What's the latest?
Correct.
Once you do your 10 years or serve both terms, somebody's not on mute. Once they fill both terms, they can't, go back and say, you know what, I'll come off for a couple of years, then go back on. They are capped at that, and so, like myself, I cannot go back to the zoning board.
I believe the code says consecutive terms, so that's something we can come back to the committee with some additional information to clarify. And the last time we did our board and commission review, we did tweak some of the reappointment processes. So when somebody's term expired and they had reached the end of their limit, they were able to continue to serve until an individual was reappointed so that we could allow the bodies to continue to meet without quorum issues. So we can identify which boards and commissions have that flexibility and which don't for that upcoming discussion.
Okay.
It might also be helpful part of we were asking the question is I was wondering if there's anything we as if there's anything we need to be looking at regarding the reappointment process in terms of the scope of this project. But I guess if somebody, building on what Trustee Sullivan said about, once you've been reappointed and you've finished your allowable term, for lack of a better word, can you be appointed to another commission? And do we want,
Yes, you can. Yeah, yes.
Okay. And does that happen very often?
It happens at times. When it generally happens, it's usually somebody with an architecture background or engineer background who, provides a lot of value on something like a parents review, and then there's a need for that type of background on, say, the Plan Commission or Transportation Commission or something like that. We have a difficult time with having architects and engineers serving in our boards and commissions, and those roles are very important on some of the land use bodies. So generally, those would be the people that may, serve on multiple different boards and commissions over time.
Okay, so I guess that speaks to then things we can do, which I think it's great that people are, so we have some, super volunteers, for lack of a better word. But that speaks to us needing to identify vacancies, because I do think as much as possible, it might be nice to allow as many members of the community to be serving on these commissions. So, okay.
Okay. So moving through this here, and actually, all right. So recognition. Another goal for the committee is to properly recognize members who devote significant time and energy to serving. Suggested methods that we can look at, some type of resolution or acknowledgement at a board meeting, following completion of volunteer's term, providing a Wilmette-related keepsake or gift at the end of their term, highlighting specific boards and commissions or their members in our social media, and I think that's somewhat tied to our recruitment process. The more we can get the word out on the good work our boards and commissions are doing, I think that's good for the community and good for attracting volunteers. In the past, we had done an annual reception up until the recession in 2008, 2009. I think with the pandemic right now, that's probably not top of the list to re-implement, but maybe something to look at in the future. But we certainly want to recognize the members who really do devote a lot of time to serving the community. So, if there's anything the committee wants us to focus on, we can certainly do that. But I think at a minimum, we'll start working towards some type of resolution or acknowledgement at village board meetings and then move from there. And this last slide here, I think Trustee Dodd, you were going to address the next steps as we move forward.
Yes. Okay, so I think what I'd like to do to talk about next steps is I'd first I've been trying to keep track as we've gone through this discussion. I'm really looking to Trustee Barrow and Trustee Sullivan here. I've been trying to keep track of what are some of the things we'd like to ask staff to do to help us kind of be prepared to kind of go to the next step. So a couple things that have been highlighted here are having them review the Housing and Human Relations commissions within other communities to kind of give us a sense of what's their mission, what's their objective, what are the and kind of what are some of the mandates that those particular those two commissions have been chartered with. I think another next step was to actually ask our legal counsel Jeff Stein to prepare a memo on just the law around the selection process, but then asking President Belinsky to prepare a memo on his process and on what he goes about. And then I think we want to look at just kind of some of the other communities and the, how are their term limits set and how many members and how long. So I think those are some things. But I'd like to ask Trustee Sullivan and Trustee Barrow, what are other things based on the presentation that was put together that you'd like us to kind of ask the staff to do to help us go to the next step in terms of looking at these issues around Housing Commission, Human Relations Commission, as well as the overall selection and appointment process?
Let me jump. I would say I would specifically like to get a sense of the surrounding communities and human relation commissions, how those are composed. What's the background of the people that compose those commissions? Are they developers? property owners, housing advocates, a whole range of possibilities of people and interests that might staff those. I'd like to see how the different types of backgrounds that they bring to those boards and commissions, and that might very well inform us about how we want to think about staffing the commissions that we hope to reinvigorate.
That's a good suggestion. Anything else, Trustee Sullivan?
No, I would agree with both of you, and I think the key would be to see where these commissions or similar commissions are established in our neighboring communities. I think we obviously got some feedback from what people want from the residents, which I know we're going to talk about. But I also think it's important to make sure we can vet this out. But where does this commission really help both, mainly the board, or help the board as well as the staff? Because again, these commissions are supposed to help the board in its ultimately decision making. Most of these are not decision making bodies. They're to vet when we get requests. And I look at like the environmental one, and I think of when coal tar was requested, we sent that to the environmental committee, and they did their work on here's the pros, cons, and here's the impact, and made a recommendation to the board that we ultimately voted on. That's where I want to make sure, where is there a gap that's going to be the best assistance to the board in our decision-making responsibilities.
And so I agree. That's so Mike, I had a couple other things that I just might be helpful as next steps. So one would be, I think, in addition to kind of looking at the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission, what's happening in the other communities, I think it would be helpful for us to reach out to some of our surrounding communities and understand what their selection and appointment process is, boards and commissions. It just might help us if not that we're, I think obviously we've received some feedback on this, and so it just might be helpful to understand what other communities do with that.
Okay, we can certainly do that.
And then another thing, and I don't know if this will be helpful or not, so maybe this is something that we take and we have a conversation, but it also might be helpful for us to have a member or a chair of the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission prior to them no longer meeting, to kind of get a sense of, their perspective of why they didn't continue to meet, and maybe they just provide some valuable perspective that we could be thinking about to make sure to kind of build on what Trustee Sullivan was saying, to make sure that whatever, that they're providing value to the board as well as the community. Because most likely they may not have met because they didn't feel that they didn't know what to work on.
Sure. We can reach out to those individuals and see if they are available and be willing to join us or at least discuss the matter in advance and provide some feedback.
Okay.
I do agree that over 7 members is a lot, and I understand it in some of the commissions because it might be nice just to have flexibility with the amount of bodies, given what their roles and responsibilities are compared to, where we do require zoning board and the planning commission to take a vote. That is binding, or it's a recommendation, but it does have an impact on the residents. So I would explore that piece. I actually like the mixed use of the term limits, because I think that gets a variety of different boards and presidents versus one president. Otherwise, you're just going to have based on appointments based on who's in office. So.
Yep.
Zoning board, obviously, I understand and know that. And 5 years is having consistency on there, because it is a steep learning curve for individuals unless you're really in that space. But we've got a good mix of board members there.
Yep. Okay, so that was helpful. Yes, that was helpful. So then, just in terms of process, I kind of wanted to suggest a process, Dan and Peter, for us to be thinking about how we move forward. We still have room for public comment, so I don't want anybody to think we're not going to get to that. But So obviously the staff has some work to do, and the board's got some other things that we're working on. So I'm thinking in terms of process that maybe our next meeting we could focus on the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission and really understand and unpack then what do we think would be the mission and objectives of these two commissions. That maybe focus more on then the term limits and things like that, and kind of come to some decisions on that topic. And then in a subsequent meeting, we could kind of address the selection and the appointment process, kind of split those into two different meetings just so that we are not trying to cover too much in one meeting. And then we would have a third meeting to kind of wrap up if we needed to, and then basically plan for our presentation to the board. And so how does that sound to you guys, kind of separating it out that way, or do you have any other suggestions? I'd just kind of like to talk about a process we're going to use, and especially so that people who are on the call know kind of how we're going to proceed here. So we've got a lot of follow-up, but now this is how we're actually going to accomplish the work.
Kathy, that works great. I think that's fine.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is there's good information on here, and going back to that one slide that showed all the various commissions and the openings is a good start for the all the board members as well as residents. But I think how you just laid it out, let's be smart and make the right decisions.
Yeah.
We don't need to do this quickly and regret that for all parties.
And so my hope would be then that we could have this meeting on kind of housing commissions and human relations, hopefully maybe toward the end of this month. So we could try to get that kind of tackled first, and then in a subsequent month, hopefully in August, we can then have another meeting on selection. Again, this is going to be obviously dependent on all of our schedules and if anybody's traveling, which I'm not, and then wrapping up sometime then after that. But so I don't know, Mike, are you comfortable with that kind of first addressing Housing Commission, Human Relations, and then kind of really unpacking that issue and having you guys spend a lot of time over the next week or two to help us get prepared to make that decision, and then moving on after that to appointment and selection. I think it's good to have, before we talk about how we're going to appoint and select people, let's make sure we know what the commissions are, what's the background diversity we need, what are the term limits, and I think we need to kind of address that first anyways.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and that'll be helpful as we do our research here. So, based on the discussion today, we've got some work to do in terms of doing research. So, late July, kind of the last week in July, I think would be a good target to have that discussion on the housing and human relations. So we'll get to work, and we'll send out some dates to the committee shortly to see if we can get that date nailed down. And anybody who's submitted an email comment to us, we can make sure we follow up with them and let them know the date and time of that next meeting. We'll also post it on our website and in our e-news, and we'll continue to communicate as well as we can so that everybody can continue to follow along in the process.
Perfect. Okay, so let me just go back to my notes to make sure I don't forget anything here. Okay, so then I think that kind of concludes the presentation. And so, so now what I'd like to do is open it up for public comment. So, and I'm hoping, Mike, you're going to help me with the logistics on this here. So, so this would be public comment that people would have on boards and commissions. If there's something else, another topic, we will have another public comment. But that's specifically on the material that was just covered. Obviously, take into account the material that we have, and now that at least a little bit the direction that the board is taking. So let me just remind everybody who might want to speak or who has submitted public comment how we're going to go about this. Because this meeting is being conducted remotely, I will ask people who are watching YouTube Live to submit comments for staff to read while they are typing. So first, I guess I will ask Mr. Brayman if there are any comments that were submitted in advance of the meeting, and Mr. Brayman will actually read those comments first. Then we will ask if there's anybody who would like to submit written comments, and those will then be read. So we'll start there, and then we'll come back to people who are on the call that would like to speak to us directly, if that's okay with everybody. So, Mr. Mike, hope that's okay.
I think that's...
or Mr. Brayman, do you have public comments that people have submitted prior to the meeting that you'd like to read for us?
Yes, I have a handful of those I'll read, and a couple other items just to touch on real quick. If anybody's watching on YouTube Live and is going to submit a comment to the YouTube Live, feature, this would be the time to submit that comment. I am watching that and checking that, so I'll check that after I read through all the comments. We've also received some comments through the Microsoft Teams chat function. That is not one of the way we're taking comments for this meeting or any of our meetings. So if you do want to participate, you'll have the opportunity to speak after I read through these comments, or you can submit them through YouTube Live. So I'm going to read through them now. I do have a number of them. So the first one is from Dan O'Brien, 1025 Ashland Avenue. Dear members of the Administration Committee and Board of Trustees, I have been a resident of Wilmette since 2013. I've been following the effort to evaluate village boards and commissions. I strongly encourage you to take this opportunity to reestablish and reinvigorate the Housing and Human Relations Commissions. These bodies can and should be a mechanism to promote and advance our collective work to make Wilmette a more welcoming, inclusive, and livable community. Recent protests and marches show that there is a strong desire for change in our community. More than ever, we need a robust and active housing commission to conduct a comprehensive and current assessment of housing needs in the village and to develop an affordable housing plan based on evidence and broad-based community input. The Housing Commission must represent the diverse interests and expertise of our residents in making these decisions, and the Housing Commission must be accountable to the trustees and community at large for setting and attaining growth targets for affordable housing in the village. It has been disappointing to see that vacancies on these commissions have not been filled, despite the fact that talented members of our community have submitted applications to volunteer their time to do this important work. I would welcome an explanation regarding why positions have not been filled. In addition, we need a transparent process for how the village makes appointments to these and other commissions. Thank you for your work on behalf of our community. Please take the necessary steps to ensure these commissions can fill their mandate. Trustee Dodd, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay.
Okay, thank you. This next one is from Paul Trainer. As a Wilmette homeowner and father of 5, I strongly support immediate staffing and re-engagement for both the Village Housing Commission and the Human Rights Commission. The lack of racial diversity in Wilmette is in large part to federally sanctioned programs that barred Black Americans from purchasing homes in Wilmette for decades. This is the textbook definition of systemic racism. Although those laws have been rescinded, the rise in property values they engendered have benefited every one of us directly and are as much a barrier to entry into our community today as restrictive covenants were in the 20th century. This barrier is now explicitly socioeconomic as opposed to race-based, but the injustice and exclusion remains, and by and large affects the same group of people. The village trustees already have much on their plates, serving our community as volunteers. They deserve our thanks, as well as our assistance in the much broader involvement of our community in spearheading this essential work. This is not an issue that can be placed on the back burner until next year, or even next month. Our duty as citizens calls us to address this long overdue challenge now, today. I hope the board will delegate responsibility and oversight for this work to other members of the community so that the need to take immediate action does not impact their already generous time commitments to the community. I would suggest utilizing the village's underutilized talent bank to find potential appointees would be a great place to start. Thank you. This is from Gail Schnitzer-Eisenberg, Wilmette resident. As part of your consideration of the role of the village talent bank and committee structure, I wanted to share my experience. My family and I moved to Wilmette 5 years ago and immediately wanted to get involved. I filled out an application to participate in village committees, human resources, and affordable housing, I believe, and sent in my resume. When I didn't hear for some time, I called the village to confirm they had received my application. I was assured that they had, and I was in the talent bank for consideration for vacancies. I never heard anything about my application thereafter until I saw the village president at early voting in the spring of 2016. When I again inquired about my application, I was told that it was moot since I was by then running for public office. Upon taking my position as a New Trier Township trustee, I have now been privy to our process for filling committee vacancies. After advertising any openings, we collect applications from community members. Then all applications are presented to the full board for appointment consideration. Through this process, we have maintained active, passionate, full committees that oversee agency allocations and make recommendations for annual grants based on lengthy applications and presentation. I do hope Wilmette will rejuvenate its committee program. We are lucky to live in an engaged community, and it is a shame not to take advantage of its expertise to better the village. Drink some water here for a second. Excuse me. This next one is from Lorelei McClure. Dear members of the Administration Committee, I have lived in Wilmette for 13 years and have been an advocate for the advancement of all aspects of affordable housing in our community. Because I believe that both the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission are essential to the effectiveness and success of putting an affordable housing plan into action, I ask you to take this opportunity, so full with opportunity, to step forward and reactivate the Housing and Human Relations Commissions. Whenever I've had the occasion to speak before the board or any of its committees or commissions, I have always expressed my gratitude for the continuous commitment I see by all bodies of our administration to keep Wilmette strong and beautiful. And I always add that we have still more to do to be inviting and inclusive, welcoming diversity. Once again, as when it was first established and during its early years, we need the Housing Commission to promote housing for low and moderate income families, people with disabilities, low-income seniors, a rental and mortgage subsidy program, and periodic studies of needs. More than ever, we need the Housing Commission to conduct a comprehensive and current assessment of housing needs in the village and to develop an affordable housing plan based on resulting evidence and broad-based community input. The Human Relations Commission stands as the welcoming host to newcomers, the body that is alert to and acts to tend the needs of all community members. The current mandate says it well. What a body concerned with community well-being engages in carrying out that charge. The Human Relations Commission is a diverse body that supports all segments of the population, including youth, seniors, persons with disabilities, minorities, and low-income groups. The Commission plans and supports community events, promotes the arts and multicultural events, promotes justice and equality, encourages and facilitates solutions to social issues, addresses emerging community needs, and serves as an advocate, educator, communicator, and point of contact for all Wilmette residents. Thank you for your attention to this request. This next one is from Gail Schechter. Gail had submitted two, so I will read both of hers. Dear Administration Committee, I was a Wilmette resident for 14 years and remember with pride what a strong Community Relations Committee, then Human Relations, the village had. I am mystified as to how its charge was reduced to merely recognizing various cultures in the Black History Month contest. Human Relations Commissions have a specific purpose around supporting diverse and inclusive communities, education, conflict resolution, and is a central government body overseeing race relations and policy and practice. I attached the U.S. Department of Justice's Community Relations Service Guidelines for Effective Human Relations Commissions, which should be Wilmette's roadmap. It begins with, in an effort to help communities resolve disputes and conflict based on racial discrimination and denial of equal rights, the Community Relations Service encourages the establishment of Human Relations Commissions. An effective commission plays a vital role in promoting community understanding and open communication. As an instrument of private and local government, the Commission is helpful in resolving conflict, settling complaints of discrimination, and promoting cooperation within the community. I also attach a summary from a 2001 meeting chaired by Wilmette's Commission, which in describing the purpose for regional networking, justifies the need for commissions to also serve as vehicles of affirmative marketing of the community to underrepresented groups. Too many Black residents, lower income residents, and people with disabilities have left Wilmette, as we heard at the Black Lives Rally in June, because they felt unwelcome. Having a Human Relations Commission ensures that Wilmette is paying attention. I'm also in full support of reestablishing a housing commission. The Wilmette Housing Commission was originally established in 1977 to promote the provision of housing for low and moderate income families, and later people with disabilities. Under the Housing Commission's leadership, the village added low-income senior housing, a rental and mortgage subsidy program, and periodic studies of needs. Here's why we need a housing commission. Equity. Without comprehensive and current data on housing needs, village decision-making about who to target in a given development is nothing more than a popularity contest, as has happened in prioritizing luxury housing, and at the other end of the spectrum, when the village decided to serve only seniors for the affordable units at Mallinckrodt because, as one housing commissioner member stated, other populations would be a political hot potato. See attached Housing Commission minutes of January 2003. Platform for growth. As Wilmette develops more multifamily housing that includes below market rate affordable rentals and condos, the Housing Commission would be responsible for assuring affordability requirements are met, enabling more to be added to the stock. Thank you. This next comment is from Laura Smith at 2149 Washington Avenue. I appreciate the Village Board's commitment to offering affordable housing and am encouraged by your June statement for accepting, quote, our responsibility as a community to foster an inclusive environment where people of all racial, ethnic, religious, and cultural backgrounds feel safe and welcome, end quote. I believe we can continue to work toward our collective responsibility to be a more inclusive and diverse village by fully staffing and empowering both the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission. This next one is from Gina Speckman and John Box, 2215 Washington Avenue. Dear trustees, simple and obvious ask. reinstate the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission. If we are a tolerant and caring community, let's act like it. How these commissions have been left to dissolve or so nothing is unacceptable. We are better than this. Please do your jobs and reinstate these and have involved citizens work on actionable results that won't take forever to implement. Quick action is needed. Thank you. This next one is from Lisa Braganca at 2125 Washington Avenue. On June 4th, the village issued a statement saying, quote, "It is our responsibility as a community to foster an inclusive environment where people of all racial, ethnic, religious, and cultural backgrounds feel safe and welcomed," end quote. But the African American population in Wilmette is less than 1%. Why? A big reason is likely that they cannot afford to live in Wilmette. Centuries of systemic racism, including redlining and discrimination in federal mortgage lending, has been a big factor in African Americans having one-tenth the wealth of white Americans. In order to be an inclusive and welcoming community, we need to make room here in Wilmette for African American residents who have not been able to accumulate the assets to pay market rates for houses or apartments. To limit our welcome to only wealthy African Americans who have been able to overcome the tremendous obstacles to accumulate wealth fails to address centuries of slavery as well as Jim Crow laws and restrictive covenants, redlining, and discriminatory federal home loan practices. To make Wilmette an inclusive and welcoming community, we need a robust, active housing commission. The village president has total control over the members of the housing commission and other commissions. While there are numerous Wilmette residents with experience in affordable housing who apply to work on the housing commission, those applicants have not been appointed as the president deemed affordable housing is not part of the housing commission's responsibilities. In the last few years, the housing commission has not met, and the president has talked of eliminating it entirely. To do so would be a mistake. There are two things that the administration committee should do right away. First, the administration committee should reform the process for appointments to village commissions. You should end the long-standing practice of the village president having complete discretion in appointing members of village commissions. Second, you should ensure that the housing commission is authorized and encouraged to recommend to the board ways that Wilmette can become an inclusive and welcoming community, including requiring that developers include affordable units in their buildings and affirmatively reaching out to encourage African Americans to move to Wilmette. As Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Let us not be indifferent. Thank you for your time. This next one is from Eve Williams. Dear Trustees Dodd, Barrow, and Sullivan, I would encourage the village board to reactivate the Human Rights Commission and the Housing Commission. Years ago, I served for 2 terms on the village's Youth Commission. It was a great experience to learn more about the community, and the Youth Commission supported many nonprofits that benefited the youth of Wilmette. I was proud to serve, and people within and outside of Wilmette were impressed by the active role the village took supporting the youth in the community. Serving was also a good opportunity for me to meet other Wilmette residents. I was sorry to see the commission disbanded soon after my 2 terms. I understand that the Human Rights Commission and the Housing Commission both still exist but don't meet regularly. I think it would make sense to fill those commissions with interested Wilmette citizens and have them meet regularly again. I would also suggest that both commissions include high school students along with adults. We had several student commissioners on the Youth Commission. Serving was advantageous to them as they learned about civics, but it was advantageous to the adults too, to inform us about things that were going that we didn't know about. Nationally, we can see that the youth in our country feel strongly about many topics, including human rights and the environment, and I think we should be Chicagoland community leaders and give our own high school students a voice in our village government. Given the citizen interest in civil rights surrounding the killing of George Floyd and others, it makes sense to devote the attention of interested community members and students to this topic and re-energize the Human Rights Commission. Similarly, given the Village of Wilmette's historic commitment to fair and affordable housing, an interest in making the community welcoming to all, regardless of race, religion, and national origin, the Housing Commission should also begin to meet again. It was probably my sheer persistence that got me appointed to the Youth Commission, but the selection process wasn't very organized or intentional. I had resigned from my work to raise my young daughters at the time, and I was a little bored. I kept pestering people at the village hall to find something for me to do. I recall that someone pulled my Talent Bank questionnaire out of a file folder, passed it on, and I was appointed. As a formerly practicing employment lawyer, I think a better and more fair selection process would be one where all applications are considered with a goal to hear a diverse group of voices on every commission. I think it would benefit the village to hear black and brown voices, as well as white voices, young and old, gay and straight, those with children and those without. You get my gist. I'm happy to volunteer my services on a commission if needed and or help you find a diverse group of residents to serve on these 2 commissions. Thanks and be well. This next one is from Van Gilmer, 137 Millbrook Lane. Dear members of the Administration Committee and Board of Trustees, I have been a resident of the Wilmette community for over 13 years, and I am also a much too rare African-American male moving alone through this village in the North Shore for far too long. There's not enough paper or time for me to try to express what internally I have felt through the years as I have made Wilmette my home. Today and during these very unusual times, it almost seems strange that I might have to encourage you to reestablish representative commissions that might actually deal with the Wilmette Village becoming more inclusive instead of remaining as exclusive as many of its residents have enjoyed for so long. I have for many decades had this small village in my heart after I became a Baha'i over 50 years ago and learned that one of only 8 Baha'i temples in the world is located right here. When I was asked to accept the position of the temple over 15 years ago, I wondered where I would live and how I could be near the Baha'i temple. It was already evident to me before I moved here that I might have to live far away to be able to afford the move. With God on my side, several very unusual circumstances eventually led me and my wife to a home in Wilmette after a year and 1/2 in Evanston. Never did we imagining the unspoken requirements and circumstances that would make moving to Wilmette a reality. Such things as whether a black family could even look at a house. So there must be thought to how not only housing might be very nice and affordable, but how the Wilmette Village will be welcoming beyond smiles and patronizing behavior. A well-planned and thought-out strategy for stepping up to inclusion over exclusive behavior, signs of welcome over threats of exclusion, must become the watchword of the Wilmette Village. I look forward to hearing great things about the plans for reviving both the Housing and Human Rights Commissions. This last one here that was submitted in advance is from Karen Summer. Dear Kathy, Dan, and Peter, I'm a 28-year resident of the village and served 2 terms on the Appearance Review Commission. I urge the Administrative Committee to make recommendations to activate the Housing Commission and the Human Relations Commission. Our village needs these commissions to be active in order to ensure that the village board's stated commitment to fairness and justice is more than a statement of words, but is supported with action. I believe that the public sentiment within the village supports the reinstatement of these 2 commissions, and it is incumbent upon our village government to represent the diverse views of all Wilmette residents. I also encourage you to make sure that the village's talent bank is fully utilized in a transparent, fair, and democratic way. Thank you for your service to the village. That includes the ones I've received in advance. I do have a number of comments on our YouTube live page that I will now read. Okay. The first one is from John Marshall. On page 27 to 28 of the agenda packet, it lists mandates/purposes for Housing and Human Relations Commissions. What happened to those and why aren't they used anymore? This next one is from John Marshall. I hope Wilmette will not just look to our neighboring communities for examples, but will also try to be a leader in the realms of housing and human relations. And another one from John Marshall. Of the people who have applied to the talent bank in the last 2 years, how many have been appointed to a board or commission? This next one is from Stephanie Bowles, 3211 Greenleaf Avenue. Thank you for working to reactivate the Human Relations Commission and Housing Commission. Diversity and affordable housing in Wilmette are very important to my family and me. This is Stephanie. Continue. Considering that neither commission has been active since 2016 or earlier, the appointment process is obviously flawed. This next one is from Jesse Dienstag, 3211 Greenleaf Avenue. Thank you in advance for rejuvenating the Housing and Human Relations Commissions. I beg you fast-track the process. We need immediate, transparent, intentional, and accountable action. And this one is submitted by Cindy Fay. A question from Malika Myers. Are all appointments made from individuals that have submitted TBQs? And that concludes the comments that we have received on the YouTube live channel. Let me refresh that real quick to make sure. Yes, that is all of them.
Okay, so, Mike, I believe now would be the appropriate time to ask members who are on the call or whether they'd like to speak to us or on the phone. So if they're joining via Microsoft Teams or on the phone, whether they'd like to address us. So how will somebody, just so I can give the right instructions, how will somebody let us know that they'd like to speak? Will they mute their phone and let us know, and then we'll write the names down? Just refresh my memory of how this is going to work.
Sure. Yeah, the logistics are a little clunky as we move through this. So we'll just ask each individual to state their name that they'd like to speak, and we'll write them down. So if some folks talk over each other, we'll just have to stop and make sure we capture everybody.
Okay, so if anybody would like to speak to us, obviously, and that would assume that they have not submitted an open comment already, correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
if,
So if you, right, I just want to make sure in terms of, so if anybody would like to speak to us and your comment was not already read, why don't you unmute your phone right now and state your name so that we can, and we'll first just get everybody's name and then we'll go in the order. And then once we've got everybody's name, I will read all the names out loud to make sure we haven't forgotten somebody. So if you would like to speak, say your name now.
yeah.
And Mike, how do they unmute their phones if they're dialed in?
Oh.
So if you're dialed in,
Dial in, you ought to be able to do it the way you would unmute your phone in any call where if you bring, no?
I thought it was stars. I thought it was in finance we had to do something else, but it might be wrong.
I believe it's *6.
That's what I thought it was.
The one individual who's dialed in is not muted right now. So I think we're okay there. But
So maybe I
*6
can get started and say my name.
Yes,
Yes.
please.
Peter, middle name Sung, S-U-N-G, last name Orr, O-H-R.
Okay, and you would like to speak, Peter?
Yes, please.
Okay, we got it.
I'll put myself on mute now.
Okay, great, yep, okay. Anybody else who would like to speak?
Isaac Hatchett.
Alan Hatchett?
Isaac.
Isaac, sorry, I'm just
Yep.
reading what, yep, got it. Anybody else?
Van Gilmer. I've already sent in a message, but I'd like to speak as well.
Okay. Thank you, Van. Okay, anybody else? Let's just give them another minute, Mike, just in case.
Sure.
Cindy Fay. Okay, Cindy Fay. Thank you, Cindy. Anybody else? Okay, so I'm going to assume that we've got everybody. So that's 4 people that we've got: Peter, Isaac, Van, and Cindy. I do want to remind each of you guys that you have 3 minutes to speak. So I think we'll just go in the order that you raised your hand, if that's okay with you. I guess we'll start. I have Peter was the first one, so I guess we'll start with Peter. And if we've missed somebody for whatever reason, maybe put something in the YouTube chat or something, whatever. If for some reason somebody was not able to get through.
I can check. Sure.
Yeah, why don't you just check before so that. Okay, so Peter, if you would like to, Peter, or if you'd like to speak, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure, I'm going to try to use my camera on this other.
Oh, perfect.
Hi. So to Kathy, Dan, and Peter, thank you very much for all of your work that you do, and it's really appreciated that we are able to have this discussion. I'm not going to repeat what many people have said so eloquently, and I support all their comments about revitalization and the need for these commissions, so I'm not going to repeat any of that. I'd like to make points, though. One being that I think it is important when we review what neighboring communities are doing with these similar types of commissions. We should maybe look beyond our neighboring communities, citywide, statewide, countrywide. I think we like to pride ourselves as an outstanding village and be not just leaders in the North Shore, but leaders in the country. So I would ask that. Another point I'd like to make is that while I greatly appreciate having this discussion, I think this topic is an important discussion that we should have on a more regular basis. Not years apart, but scheduled periodically, so that we have these refreshed discussions and make sure things are current and relevant with the times. So those are the only comments. I'm not going to belabor with all the excellent points that have been already made, and just want to thank everyone for all their hard work.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Okay, just writing down your comments, so sorry. Isaac Hatchett, I think, would be next.
Hi. So I wrote it down because I'm not great at public speaking. But my name is Isaac Hatchett. I've lived in Wilmette since I was 5 years old, and I've been in the Wilmette education system from kindergarten to 8th grade, and I'm now going to be attending New Trier. I'm a member of the group called Heroes. Our name and our aim is healing everyday racism in our schools. We're a working group of students, parents, teachers, and community members that self-organized in early 2018. We feel that affordable housing is necessary to eradicate the long-term structural racism that feeds the kind of everyday racism that exists in our schools. Going to school in Wilmette has had damaging effects for me and all my fellow students, mainly for the racism me and my fellow students see on the daily and slowly accept. While I was not the victim of racism, I was damaged because I've been corrupted by the racist ideas and biases presented daily. When you only meet about 12 students of color in your entire 9 years of school, and meet, to my knowledge, no one under upper middle class, you create damaging biases and instant thoughts. If you rarely see people of color in your life, you immediately think different, or how do I act when around anyone of color? This is not okay, and this is not normal. This causes for racism to come easily when you begin distancing yourself from people of color because of your institutionalized fear. This again not only damages the people your biases target, but it damages you to never interact or even hold friendships with people of color or people of lower economic levels. In a society that systematically pushes down people of color, making it harder to buy houses or apartments in rich areas like these, or feel welcome to do so, it is our job to stand up against injustice and help break down these barriers of inequality. And if we truly believe everyone is equal and we believe our school systems are good, then we should let everyone attend them, no matter their race or level of wealth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Van Gilmer, I believe you'd be next.
Hello, I've already written in, but I thought I should say to you that after 7 decades, I'm surprised that there can be nothing that will make us any better in our communities that are either all black or all white if we don't start thinking about something that we can do that is extraordinary, not just build housing that is affordable, that looks like crap, not just try to make a place for a few people to live so that we can say that we're integrated. But we need a commission that by heart thinks about how can we begin to include people who are missing. As Isaac said, there just shouldn't be these days where I run into young people who are meeting a black person for the first time, who have a friend who is black for the first time. Surely it's damaging to us all to have to live a lifetime separated and trying to act as though we are together. So it's important, I think, for Wilmette, particularly, to think about how it can begin to attract people who are missing. I said in my letter, I go a lot of places around the North Shore, and very often I am the only black person. And I can't tell you how that feels. I thought I should speak to you to just show you it's not an easy thing. And yet I have learned through all my decades to be able to just walk with my head up, act like everything is fine. And I know that I don't want children to be that way. I don't want children to graduate from schools here in the North Shore of Chicago and find that they're just meeting people of color for the first time. So I'm happy that this is on the board. I'm happy that there's a possibility that you're going to think about not only housing, but on human relations. How do we build them? how do we build them beyond our talk? So that's all I need to say.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, I believe our last public comment would be from Cindy Fay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much for the chance to speak. I've already submitted a comment, but I think it by email to public comment. But I honestly, after Mr. Orr and Isaac Hatchett and Mr. Gilmer spoke, I only want to applaud with their words. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so Mr. Brayman, before we close public comment on this particular topic, is there anything is there anybody who's waiting?
No, I don't believe so. There's one additional comment on YouTube Live from Leslie Wayrich that says, yes, Isaac.
Yeah. So, okay, I would just like to say...
Hey, Mike, I thought somebody named Lori wanted to speak.
Lori.
I know we're not supposed to do it on the text, but I just saw a text come through from her on this.
Yep, let me, and it looks like...
So I don't know if she's on the call or...
Is that through a chat? Okay.
Yes, I'm here. Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I thank you. This is Lori Goldstein. I submitted a comment, but it wasn't included. I had emailed it, but maybe it didn't. So if you don't mind, I would be willing to read it if it's not too late.
No, yes, we don't mind at all, Lori. So I think it's fine. You're moving around a little bit, so just to make it easy for us to hear you and stuff. But no, I think we'd be happy to have you speak. So go ahead, and I apologize that we somehow didn't get your public comment, but we'd love to hear from you.
Oh, that's quite all right. And everything's different in this day and age, so I totally understand. No worries. I'll just read you what I had emailed to you, and so it can be in the public record. Dear trustees, Barrow and Sullivan, thank you for your service to our community. I have no doubt that you each put your heart and soul into your service of our village, and I'm grateful for your time and expertise. I'm writing to you as members of the administration committee. I realize that you now have heard from other Wilmette residents who support, number one, a well-utilized talent bank, number two, a fully functioning housing commission charged with creating a substantial affordable housing plan, and three, a fully functioning human relations commission. I am in enthusiastic support of all of these areas. I wish to focus my comments on the third area regarding the Human Relations Commission. In its June 4th letter to the community, the Wilmette Village trustees stated, quote, "It is our responsibility as a community to foster an inclusive environment where people of all racial, ethnic, religious, and cultural backgrounds feel safe and welcomed," end quote. This statement is a lovely and no doubt authentic sentiment from the village board that Wilmette intends to be a welcoming community. Yet I ask what that means to now be a welcoming community to all, when in our past, Wilmette sadly was not welcoming to all. As you may know, historically, Wilmette residents have a widespread history of excluding Black people and other people of color from residing in our village. It is difficult for me to imagine that we can genuinely describe ourselves as a welcoming community until we uncover this painful history and grapple with it in some way. As an analogy, I'd like you to imagine that a member of our community hosted large and wonderful parties in their home to which all were invited except you. It was known to all, including you, that you were intentionally excluded from these terrific gatherings. This went on for many years, with many residents participating in your exclusion. One day, out of the blue, the host decided they wanted you to come to their party. They gave no acknowledgement of their previous hurtful exclusion. Would you want to go to the party? Probably not. I'm sure you understand the gist of this analogy. An understanding and acknowledgement of our past is groundwork that must be laid in order to truly create a welcoming Wilmette. The Human Relations Commission seems to be the appropriate body to compile this history, to research ideas for acknowledgement, and to make recommendations on that basis. You may know that former Wilmette Village President John Jacoby wrote 2 articles for the Wilmette Beacon related to this topic, entitled, why do so few African Americans live in Wilmette, end of quote. I have attached the articles for your reference. Mr. Jacoby has made a fine start that I hope the Human Relations Commission can build upon. We all know that Wilmette is not unique in this history of racial exclusion. Our neighboring towns to the north, south, and west of us all have histories of residential exclusion based on race. In fact, much of our country has a similar history, as documented in books like The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein and many others. I do not single out Wilmette as unique at all in having this kind of history. However, Wilmette is the town I live in, and so that's where I'm directing my comments. I fully agree that this era of racial residential exclusion is long past, and no one currently living in Wilmette likely participated. Yet that merely means that the responsibility to honestly understand and acknowledge that history has been handed down to our generation. I hope that we will decide that the buck stops here and not leave this responsibility to the next generation. Our village has the opportunity to take the lead on this effort and become a role model for other communities. I strongly encourage the Administration Committee to include this effort as part of the task of the Human Relations Commission. And if I can be of further service, please let me know. Well, I'm a Wilmette resident since 1994. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lori.
And Trustee Dodd, this might be a good opportunity for me to clarify our public comment process, because this is new for everybody. So if anyone sends an email to publiccomment@wilmette.com, that's what we'll read during the meeting. If an email is sent to members of the committee, that's included in the meeting materials and posted to our website, and all committee members have access to that, as does the public, and can review it. We do have cutoff times for the comments that are emailed to the committee, so if yours was not included in the additional agenda material packets by about, I think, 10 or 11 a.m. today, we'll post the remaining ones we got after the fact by tomorrow, so they're accessible. Any public comments received up to the start date of the meeting are then read during the meeting. So, Ms. Goldstein, if we missed yours, I apologize for that, but we'll continue to make sure we get all the comments to the public and members of the community as we move forward.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Raymond, for clarifying that. So I believe that would officially close out public comment on that particular item. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We're just about to move beyond this topic, but I just, I would like to thank everybody who spoke today. Obviously, where we typically don't respond to public comment, we're going to take all these comments and they'll be incorporated into what we look at for our next meeting. But I do want to thank everybody for speaking and for emailing us again. And I hope you all felt like the material that was presented today, I would say on behalf of the 3 of us on this commission, we hear you, and we are committed to looking at the Human Relations Committee and the Housing Commission and figuring out how to reinvigorate those, as well as our selection process. So our next meeting, as we said, we will get into more detail here, but I think we all know that your feedback's been heard, and we are obviously going to address those issues and try to do what we can to, like I said, reincorporate those inactive commissions back to accomplishing something that all of us in the community can be proud of. Okay, so moving on from that, is there, I'd like to ask any of the 2 trustees, is there any new business that you would like to hear? Is there any new business you'd like to add or have us address? Okay, I'm going to assume that's a hearing done.
No, I was waiting for Trustee Sullivan to speak, but no, okay. None for me.
Okay, so hearing none, then I'd like to ask, is there anybody who would like to speak about public comment that's not, again, that was not covered and it wouldn't cover the discussion on boards and commissions? So we're not reopening up public comment at this point to hear additional information on boards and commission, but is there anything else that was not on the agenda that anybody that's on the call would like to hear, or Mr. Brayman, was there anybody that you heard from? Did we receive any public comment that prior to our meeting that we'd like to address?
I did not receive any prior to the meeting. I am checking our YouTube live chat feature now and do not see any. So we'll give that an opportunity as you ask other members participating if they have any comments.
Okay, so then I would like to ask any individual who's connected via phone or Microsoft Teams if they would like to address an item that was not on the agenda. If you would like to, please mute your phone or mute Microsoft Teams and let us know that you'd like to speak. And we'll give everybody a minute or so. Okay, okay, so I'm going to assume you've not heard anything on YouTube Live or anything, Mike, so can we?
I've received no comments on YouTube Live.
Okay. And I don't see anything that, okay, so I'm going to assume then that we don't have anybody that'd like to speak about public comment. So the final item on the agenda is an adjournment, so can there be, sorry, was that on me? Okay. I don't want to rush too quickly. Okay, so can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
And then a second?
So seconded.
Thank you. So then, Mr. Brayman, again, normally we would just do it, but can you please call the roll to adjourn the meeting?
Yes, Trustee Barrow?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye. Okay, so the meeting is adjourned. It is 3:40. We will definitely see everybody at our next meeting. We will work diligently to get something on the calendar, and please look for that coming soon. So thank you again for everybody for coming.